Welcome to the Poundcast, the Digital Pound Foundation's podcast, dedicated to explaining and discussing all aspects of a digital pound and the impact of new forms of digital money. Your host is Jannah Patchay, Policy Lead and one of the originating members of the Digital Pound Foundation. Today, Jannah will be speaking to Olaf Ransome, founder of 3C Advisory and also known as the banker's Plumber. In this episode, we turn our attention to the applications of new forms of digital money in wholesale markets. As we'll see in this interview, the potential of digital currencies to improve settlement times has massive implications for liquidity and funding across the financial system. In the digital asset space, there are new exchanges or execution venues and new custody solutions. Settlement processes also need a means of payment. The line to date is that if the assets are on-chain, then we need that means of payment to also be on-chain. But what are the requirements for something to be a widely accepted means of payment and settlement? And does it have to be central bank issued or backed by reserves held at a central bank?
Thank you for joining us today, Olaf. Personally, I'm so excited to have you on the Poundcast today because I don't know if you remember this, but several years ago, it was a conversation with you that first set me off on the whole digital currencies and new forms of digital money journey in the first place. So I was interviewing you for an article about what was needed to build markets and digital assets. And you mentioned your concept of the holy trinity of liquidity, custody, and an effective means of settlement and payment. And I think that was the first time someone had mentioned that to me. But then after that, it kept coming up in subsequent conversations. And that eventually was what sparked my interest in CBDCs and stablecoins. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I didn't realize I had all of that to answer. I remember the interview and the process well, and I remember coming up with that expression at finality. I hadn't used it in a number of years, but of late, the more I have conversations with people about how the digital asset world is evolving, the more I think that it's still correct that you end up with having liquidity, execution venues, custody, asset, and means of payment. And they're three different things, and they interact in the future in ways that aren't necessarily the same as they interact today. For example, I don't see a role for a CSD in the way that it currently does it, where you do a bunch of trades and say, hey, CSD, settle all these trades. There might be a settlement service of some kind, but I think the assets are going to be decentralized. The other part that I'm more recently convinced of is that securities part. The assets are on the public blockchain. Means payment won't be on the public blockchain, far too difficult in wholesale at least, but custody assets, I think, will find their way to the public blockchain.
So before we get into the detail, although I'm aware that you dive straight in there, let's take a little step back. And I know our focus today is going to be very much on digital assets and wholesale settlement use cases for new forms of digital money. But let's talk a little bit about your journey to this point and what brought you to these topics and these interests, and what work have you done on this space over the last few years?
What brought me to the digital part was really the work with what once upon a time was called the USC project, Utility Settlement Coin Project, and then became Finality when we turned it into a proper company. And that was exactly focused on that third leg. That means payment. And I think I have a very well-known gentleman at UBS, Hyder Jaffrey, to thank for that, and as well as the guy who eventually became CEO of Finality, Ron Ram. But Hyder and I had connected somewhere, and he joked in a note on LinkedIn, hey, if you're ever in London, I don't live in London, I'm in Zurich and travel around a lot, come by, we'll have coffee. At the time, I was never in London. And then I was going through London on the way to go and watch a football game at Anfield in back end of 2017. Dean Hyder said, how about that coffee? And we had coffee. Little did I know at that point what exactly was happening around USC and what was happening with R3. But as that...
And what was the utility settlement coin?
The utility settlement coin was fundamentally, at the simplest level, it was a research project because it was the USC project to look at how do you create this method of having payment on chain. And it was funded like a research project. 15 different institutions just gave some money to a project team that was embedded with the IT organization Climatics in London, looking at how might you do this. And between 15 of them, they came up with a bunch of outcomes they wanted so that the thing could then be investable. Up to that point, it was just research money. So I joined with Ron and the team. We worked the latter parts of that in 2018 to get ready for what was effectively a fundraiser Series A in early 2019 to do that. By the time we moved from project to company, we figured out that there was a path to doing this thing, to setting up a structure, FMI-like, that could deliver a means of payment on chain that was the equivalent of fiat cash. And that was quite significant because there were a couple of things happening in parallel at the time. And I think we have to give an enormous amount of credit to the original 5 founders, and particularly to Hyder at UBS. Firstly, there was this drive where assets were becoming digital. Nobody knew when, but we'll probably do some new stuff. It feels like we'll do some new stuff. There's the other part, which is the pressure on banks' balance sheets, which is if you end up with cash at a commercial bank, that's an asset and you've got to have capital against it on risk weights and what have you. And actually, all this whole correspondent banking thing of York that we know quite well, of Credit Suisse Bank in New York and Barclays in the UK, etc., was becoming increasingly a burden. So one goal of the whole means of payment part, that project work aimed at, and then the finality aimed at, was deal with means of payment on chain, but also create something that's a zero risk weighted asset. And that's what drove all of that work. And then post-work finality, I did some work with the guys here in Switzerland with SDX, the 6 digital exchange, which is the first to get up and be regulated as both an exchange and a CSD. And that was some more recent work. And along the way, just got very involved in lots of these conversations, working groups, panels, talking about what does it take for us to get this new digital asset infrastructure up and running.
So I think there's a lot of focus on the retail, so business to business or consumer payments, use cases of digital money. And people tend to be less aware of the wholesale use cases and the wholesale users. And it sounds as though, given that the USC was conceived a few years ago, was it 2016 or 2017? 15, that's 7 years ago, which is early days for this stuff, that at least 15 banks at the time had a reasonably clear vision of what a payment mechanism that was on ledger or on chain, whichever terminology you prefer, could bring to them. And can we explore that in a little bit more detail? You've touched on the digital asset settlement side. You've touched a little bit on the importance of having zero risk-weighted assets on balance sheet. What were some of the other potential benefits that those banks foresaw at the time?
So the other part in this was really to create a single pool of liquidity. And in fact, that's not even a novel idea for digital asset people. We have been, as an industry, looking for this single pool of liquidity and a global collateral pool. So in liquidity, you think about cash, and in a global collateral pool, you think about all your assets as well. This has been like the holy grail for the longest time, because whilst we've got relatively effective security settlement systems, payment systems, it's a bit of a disjointed mess. Each individual piece is separate and they don't link up particularly well. So if I use an example from my past that I know well, if you're Credit Suisse, in recent years, you haven't had to worry too much about liquidity in Swiss francs. There's swimming in it, and there's no interest and so on, but rates just went up today. So we'll go back to the way it was before 2008, which is if you want liquidity in your Credit Suisse, for example, 15 banks come to you and go, hey, Credit Suisse, make some payments to CLS for us. You need to put out collateral and take in cash. Well, that's great. Credit Suisse can do that in Switzerland. That's super. If they need to make some payments in dollars, they're relying on their correspondent bank or Nostro to make those payments. And the whole Nostro thing is actually deceptively expensive. So sometime last night, Credit Suisse probably sent, let's pick 10,000 payments to the Bank of New York in dollars. And they arrived at the Bank of New York computer last night, and the computer went, whoa, the Swiss people have woken up. 10,000 payments. How much does that make? And for the sake of argument, it was $347 million. And the Bank of New York computer looks at that and goes like, do you think we should make those? And On the one hand, it's got some rules from the Fed about throughput for volume and value. And on the other side, it's got credit risk. Now, let's just put Credit Suisse's recent troubles just aside, just pretend that all banks are equal just for a second. So the computer at Bank of New York is always going to make a decision. Am I making sure I don't get a yellow card from the Fed for being late and not doing what I'm supposed to do? But I give credit risk to Credit Suisse, or do I not give any credit to Credit Suisse and I get the yellow card from the headmaster? In that equation, the Fed always wins. So Credit Suisse runs up a big overdraft in dollars. No amount of Swiss francs, none, can help them. It's not possible to do same day Swiss francs to dollar swaps without taking settlement risk. You can do Canada for dollars, but it's basically small and irrelevant.
And that's due to the latencies in the settlements, in the cross-border settlements infrastructure that we have today.
Oh, exactly. That's the infrastructure we've got. Yes, we've got CLS Bank, which is quite brilliant at the thing it does, but it can't deal with same day, barring the one little exception. So you have all these overdrafts. At the end of the month, the liquidity calculations come in and they go, God, Credit Suisse, you used a lot of credit. And actually on the other side of it, the Bank of New York credit calculations go, you gave a lot of credit to those Swiss people, and everybody has to have buffers. Hugely expensive. So as those 15 banks were thinking a little bit about the future of digital assets, they had a little mind, and I'll leave it at a little mind. Not all 15 of them got this, and not all 15 of them got this equally well. They had a little mind saying, well, actually, it'd be great if when we did all this stuff in a new design, we could just, each of us have one pot in each currency and make all the settlement processes draw on the balances in that one pot. And hey, presto, we won't have any overdrafts, and all that expensive stuff that we got paid for today will go away. There's a little bit of irony in this, which is at the time UBS were talking about this. Well, that's actually what happened in Switzerland today. In the TradFi settlement system, securities and payments draw on the same pot of Swiss francs. So you've got several systems pointing at one thing. And I looked at that, but yeah, that makes, back to, we're excited in the conversation, how the hell did you get into this? I looked at what was going, that makes perfect sense. To do that in New World, generally, as opposed to just specifically in one currency in Switzerland, whereas that makes absolutely perfect sense to me to do that. And that makes better sense than having a system that is locked in where you have to have the assets and the means of payment on the same platform, quite possibly very tightly coupled with the execution rhythm, which is a model that was being pushed around in other places. So that early on made sense. And little did we all know how long it would take to get there, because this was all the things associated with it were so novel for the regulators that a number of rounds of questions was quite daunting. I could have done a PhD in the meantime that it's taken there, but you have to go through this process, revising it and explaining it, doing it, and you're very well aware of what it takes with regulators. So that's a little bit about how that all comes together. And that once you've got that on-chain means payment, you can start to do some clever things. You could be Credit Suisse and go, okay, I'll take my Swiss collateral. I've got plenty of that. I'll give that to the Swiss National Bank. I'll get back either a private equivalent to the CBDC or CBDC. It doesn't really matter. And then I'll swap those Swiss francs for dollars or euros or pounds or whatever I need right now to settle trades. That would be very clever, because then everything moving much faster. You can get much closer to same day settlement. And that's great, because the longer you wait to settle, the more counterpart credit risk you've got on the balance sheet. And that's a big number too. We did some work on that as the USC project before we became Finality. So it's not a scientific test, and certainly not good enough even for a PhD. It was very lightweight bit of research, but we checked the balance sheets of all the 15 USC members at the time. Those CCR numbers are in the balance sheet. We figured out what would happen if you moved the meter by 1%. 1% less CCR was $300 million of risk-weighted assets.
Wow.
Wow, 1%. So it's all in the balance sheet. So now we have to get the means of payment up and running, get them connected up so that you can do repo transactions and get CBDC or its equivalent. You can do CBDC versus CBDC settlement. to get payment assets in another currency.
So I think this is really fascinating, and it's largely invisible, even though there has been a fair amount of discussion on it within certain circles. It's largely invisible to the general public or even to interested punters who are observing goings on with CBDC and stable coins. Most of the conversations are very much geared at the retail side. And yet what you're describing is actually the capability to really fundamentally transform some of the processing and the ways in which financial institutions interact with each other. And so the way that our financial system operates on a day-to-day basis, and to reduce a lot of the inefficiencies that have been introduced and baked in over decades and decades through legacy infrastructure and legacy means of operations. And I think that's not really widely discussed, and it is really interesting, actually, when you look at it through that lens. So what have we seen in practice? I mean, I know Finality has been advancing its plans and is the largest project, but individual banks have also made their own moves towards introducing digital settlement assets and coins and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those projects and what they've achieved?
Let's stick on the wholesale side here. I think if you take something like JPM coin, it has been useful. I think early on, its potential benefits were a little overstated. I did have a wry smile when Jamie Dimon commented, yeah, JPM coin's great. We've got a ton of dollars at the Fed, so everybody should feel good. I'm like, yeah, but if I've got JPM coin, say I'm a wholesale guy and I've got 10 million. That's why you need to be a wholesale guy, because as a retail guy, I don't have 10 million. But as a wholesale guy and I got a 10 million balance of JPM coin, I have no different situation than if I had a balance of 10 million at JPM. I'm an unsecured creditor of JPM. If something were to happen to JPM, we'd have a lot more problems, but let's leave it at that and leave it at the theory. I'm in the queue with everybody else as an unsecured creditor of JPM. And it really doesn't matter what I've got. And this, what have you got a claim on, is really important. Like the whole thing that Finality were trying to do was to turn it into a fiat equivalent. Because all the Basel regulations and the rest, it's like, well, it'd be great if it was zero risk weighting. And to do that, you need to put the money, you need to have the reserves at the central banks. Then you need to separate that collateral, that cash that people have paid in, from the operating company. And if you can do that, then the collective owners of the coin will balance, whichever you prefer, coin and balance, the same. I've got a claim directly on that collateral if something happens. And you can see there, why did the idea of Libra and DM on the retail side worry everybody? Because it's got all these people are going to be unsecured credited in the way they were going to do it. And that whole, what's the claim on, very central to all the discussions with all the regulators thinking about how do we do this means of payment on chain. I think the JPM coin has enabled some things. I was talking to a bank the other day that for these purposes can remain nameless, where they're doing a very interesting new thing that's between the world of TradFi and between the world of DeFi. So they're using HQLAX, which is a collateral tool that's DeFi, practically it's new stuff, new fintech, that says, take a basket of collateral and exchange it for a different basket of collateral. It's a very standard investment banking, so-called collateral upgrade trade. I need to borrow money, but I can't borrow money against the stuff that I've got. But if I swap the stuff that I've got for some better quality stuff for the time being, then I can go and raise money. It's the way stuff gets.
So like repo or securities lending transaction.
In a repo, you normally sell securities versus cash and then agree to repurchase them later. And in a collateral trade, you say, I'll give you a bar. What I really need is green securities to raise money against. But I've only got blue. But somebody who's an asset manager is terrific. I'll charge you a fee and I'll lend you some green things and you give me the blue ones as collateral in the meantime. And that's a sort of messy trade. Imagine that I had 4 or 5 different blue securities. I'd have to deliver them to you. You'd have to see them. Okay, I've got all of those. Now let me send the green security over. Latency, delays, risks, all of the above. It's not going to be a great process. What HQLX have done is, okay, terrific. We'll just lock up the blue things in one place, give you the green. And that's good. That alone is quite good because sometimes that's useful for the balance sheet. What this bank that I was talking to, so we're taking the green stuff and then we're using that to raise money. We're getting JPM coin for that, but then we're turning it straight back to cash. And then we're using that pot of cash at JP to spread around to all the places that we need dollars to settle trades. Perfectly logical bit of cash management and liquidity management by that particular institution. But it's all ever so slightly disjointed. A little bit of this new thing, swap blue for green, great. They do a little bit more new stuff of swap green for stable coiny thing. But it's not JPM coin, useless outside the four walls of JP, completely useless. So it's no purpose whatsoever. But then swap that back to fiat and using that pool of fiat in the old world to drive all these old world transactions and settle the needs.
But how do I swap it back to fiat? I can only redeem it with JPM, can't I?
Yeah, you go to JP, you got balance of JP, you got terrific. Rather than the 10 million balance of shiny coins, can I have 10 million bucks, please? It's like,
okay. And along that journey, you've gone from blue collateral all the way to cash, basically.
Yeah.
You can do something with the cash.
Right. But as I described, it's a bunch of steps. There's a little bit of the new, which is helpful, but you still got to do these awkward things to go back to the old. And the particular bank in question is still thinking, yeah, I've raised some dollars, but now I've still got to spray all those dollars out. In many places, I need dollars. And if those dollars were all CBDC or its equivalent like Finality, and you have interoperability to work with all the settlement processes, all those settlement places where they need those dollars would just draw on that one big pot of dollars. And that would be much more efficient because those dollars are getting moved to legacy systems. So my friend at this bank, his treasury guys got to put in, okay, so we turned the green coins into cash at JP to 100 million balance. Let's send some payments. Then you got to hope that the JP computer sends that out in the Fed for you. And there's no one, because it could be at that point that somebody else is using another payment using JP's dollars at the Fed. So there's disconnect there. You can't quite instantly do exactly what you want. You're still relying on that intermediary of JP. Whereas if we can get that last bit, get that means of payment sorted, that's just a huge enabler to do all these necessary settlement things which require us all to cooperate with that.
So you're reducing the number of intermediaries, you're reducing the number of steps, you're reducing the number of potential failure points when it comes to credit risk and settlement risk.
And you're shortening time. And there's a whole thing at the moment, the Americans have announced with the usual fanfare that they're going to go to T+1. And then there are some voices shouting, the hecklers from the audience at the comedy club, yeah, but there's going to be a problem and that's going to be a problem. And they're right. There are lots of things that are difficult about it, but shortening settlement gets back to that 300 million risk-weighted asset statement that I made earlier. We haven't quite got the right tools to shorten it. But if we get CBDC or Finality, both work, and that gets me point in the public-private sector who does what. Public sector should set the rules and mark out the ballpark and let the private sector do what it needs to do. Because you just get colossally big in structures with the bureaucrats doing it. Once you've got that pool, then you can enable the other things as they come along. And you're right. You observed earlier that this feels like it's like way in the back. Never heard of this. This is not a topic. And it isn't even in the banks. The average trader hasn't got a clue about money. Ron Ram, good friend of mine now, the CEO of Finalities. Yeah, we just assume there was money. We just book trades. Assume money. Money just magically happens.
The money will be there to settle the trade. It's the Treasury Department's responsibility to then figure out how the money is in the right account at the right time and stuff like that.
And that's where you get into these liquidity buffers and how expensive it is. And the guys at HQLAX has done what I would say is a solid for the rest of the industry in putting numbers on that. So around the time we were setting up Finality, folks at Wyman did a little bit of research on liquidity. I said, yeah, finger in the air. Big banks have about 100 billion in liquidity buffers. And the intraday component of those buffers is anywhere from 10 to 30%. Intraday means the buffer you need to make sure you have the right amount of money in the right currency in the right place at the right time. 100 billion. Probably your funding cost is about 100 basis points difference between long-term and short-term. You raise the capital, but then you use it short-term and get less money. That was the sort of base number. 100 billion per bank, big bank, pretty big number. And then HQLAX came along, I think, 18 months ago and said, actually, take a look at balance sheets of the then 29 and now 30 GSIBs. The average GSIB has liquidity buffers of $235 billion. So now go back to the work of Wyman that says 10 to 30%. Right? So 10 to 30%, $235 billion is a big number. It's hugely expensive for any one of these banks, right? But the traders don't really get it. People working in a bank don't really get it. But for me, that liquidity cost all along has been like, this is the thing, guys. You can outsource to India, to Krakow, to Raleigh, to wherever the hell you want. You will never, ever save as much money by moving heads around as you will by actually sorting out how much liquidity you need.
So I think you talked quite a lot about how a CBDC or its private sector equivalent in the wholesale space can be, what it can enable for wholesale markets. But what are the requirements for something to be a widely acceptable means of payment? You've talked about the need to understand what it is exactly that you're holding. So if I'm an asset manager holding JPM coins or something, I need to know what exactly that's worth and what I'm exposed to and what recourse I have to it, as well as it treated like a deposit and cap, or what exactly are my protections around it. So what are the requirements for something to be a widely acceptable means of settlement in wholesale markets? And is it necessary for it to be risk-free, as in finality solution, or can something be widely adopted without having reserves held at the central bank?
Let's do the last one first. So if you haven't got reserves, if you do something like, for example, Circle, who basically run a treasury and they invest the money, then you're a collective investment scheme, simple as, and you need to be regulated as such. The challenge with that is that in nervous times and under stress, the fund's got to sell off assets to meet the redemptions. And you go back to March of 2020, the commercial paper market collapsed. And there was huge money markets collapsed, massive redemptions of money market funds, and you couldn't sell the assets fast enough. That is also a big factor in all the deliberations around Libra and DM and Facebook, that in the end, you create this means of payment that's got so many assets that if anything, if the wind blows the wrong way, the consequences of doing the rational thing are quite catastrophic for the market. So I think it is better if there are central bank reserves, and it's better if that risk weight is zero. The other part for it all to be widely accepted is you need to work out how can everybody play who's in the wholesale banking space. And this is something that's generally referred to as the access rules. Who's allowed to have access to the asset? And it's one thing to settle an asset during the day. You and I can settle a trade now. That per se doesn't tend to worry the regulators. What does worry the regulators is at the end of the day, who's sitting on the balances. Because depending on who's holding the balances when the music stops for the day, despite all of this 365, 724, blah, 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 always on, I can categorically assure you there will be a value date and the day will end in each currency. It just has to, because we have balance sheets. And you've got to be able to do this at some point so that all the regulators worry about who's got the asset at the end of the day. So if you imagine you could freely transfer this wholesale currency, and let's just say in pounds, where we know that Finality's just had its approvals from the Bank of England to run a payment scheme, and a systemically important one. So it has all the Finality, settlement Finality associated with it. Let's imagine that Credit Suisse were allowed to play. And at the end of the day, Credit Suisse is sitting on a whole big lump of pounds. If the Bank of England are not happy about that, they have no jurisdiction over Credit Suisse. So naturally, you think about these things in these payment systems. The regulators are at pains to make sure that they have some sort of regulation and jurisdiction over all the people that can hold it. So as we begin the next part of the journey, which is to use things like finality in anger in production, there's a need to solve for in what way can everybody hold balances at the end of the day or do something intelligent with them at the end of the day so that the money's available. Because if Credit Suisse had some pounds, they want to swap those and then use yen, Canada, Mexico later, whatever. So if you were really hard as the Bank of England, the banks we regulate, then you limited the number of people who could hold the finality balances at the end of the day. And so then we need to solve for that to figure out how do you meet the necessary regulatory request, which says we want to be very sure who has and hasn't got balances at the end of the day, with the practicalities of opening the system and people having balances and so on. But you could do some very intelligent things. To use another real life example from my past with Credit Suisse, standard behavior. If Credit Suisse happened to be long dollars or any other client, but BNY's was long dollars, they'll buy a money market fund simply because a money market fund is a security and it's not an unsecured receivable from JP, from Bank of New York. So if you thought about how would this go to a new digital era, you could have a setup where you make sure that at the end of the day, those that aren't allowed to hold the balances do something like that for 2 minutes or do a repo trade for 2 minutes. And the money comes back and you can use it for settlement. And that's much better than today. If tonight Credit Suisse happened to be long, I don't know, 150 million bucks at BNY and they bought a money market fund, it's a random walk when on a Friday they get their dollars back, which is awkward really. If you're just sitting there as Credit Suisse and the clock's ticked round, ding, it's Friday. And if you're the Credit Suisse cash management guy, you're like, excellent, Friday, I've got all these dollars. Well, I haven't got all these dollars. But in the meantime, I've still got to make payments. I've still got to have overdraft, and complications. So we've got to solve for this access thing at the end of the day, that anybody who needs to can play in one of these payment schemes for as long as possible, even if at the end of the day they're not allowed to hold a balance. They need to go through some proper window dressing to make that happen. And then you've got this payment asset, which is useful for settlement practically 24 hours a day. And that gets to be really good. Then you need, for it then to work, you also need an FX market, right? So I want to swap dollars, pounds for euros, whatever. I probably need the repo markets to play along as well. So I can do collateral versus cash. Very theoretically, you might need a money market business, although the amount of money market stuff that gets done, given the risk that's involved, is increasingly small. You need those auxiliary systems to play along as well.
Finally, to conclude, to kind of bring together a lot of what you've been saying, I think you've described the creation of a logical capability for achieving all of these benefits. But ultimately, in order to realize those benefits, we're going to need some pretty major upgrades to the cross-border infrastructure that links different jurisdictions' payment and settlement systems together, aren't we? How achievable is that? And how do you see that working out in practice?
So I think the first thing you get once you've got multiple currencies, whether you've got multiple finality currencies or one is CBDC and one is finality, is you need that FX capability to exchange. That's the first thing you need. That requires a new electronic marketplace. I don't think that's super difficult. And in fact, I know that at least there's one offering in space. My very good friends at Fintium, run by Brian Nolan over in London, they're already in that intraday space. So they've got an existing platform, and plugging in a different means of payment wouldn't be particularly difficult. I think what you then see on the security side, that could go one of two ways. On the security side, it could be that the securities platforms change so that the existing platform can interact with the new means of payment. New exchanges possibly could be done. The other thing we might see is that the assets get tokenized. So effectively locked in the CSD and put onto a new platform. And by its nature, new tech is better at interoperability. And new tech far more easily able to make use of an API and say, great, I've got my trading platform here. I use an API to interface with the payment leg.
So we're talking about, alongside the creation of these new forms of digital money, the infrastructure that supports them will be built to be interoperable out of the box, basically?
Yeah, I think interoperability will be front and center. And my general sense is it is easier to get that interoperability from new tech than from old tech without, for a minute, condemning all the old to being used. That's the bit that folks are going to have to examine. Do I make my old thing talk to the new thing? Or do I effectively lock up the asset side in the old one and create, I'm going to use the expression carefully, a mirror of that old thing on a new platform so that I can more easily take care of things. My gut tells me it's the latter and not the former, but that shouldn't be taken as the panacea for all ills. There will be many ways to do that, and greater minds on the tech front than mine thinking about it, fortunately.
Thanks very much for that. And on a final note, what are the things that keep you up at night in terms of the most exciting opportunities that you see in this space?
At the moment, probably two things. One a little bit more closer to the day job stuff, and one a little bit more closer to the fun stuff. On the day job stuff, I think what we have to see is the emergence of some asset or asset class that can really find its home in the digital environment. I see a lot of people make the argument you can achieve many things with securitization. You don't need tokenization. That debate's too long to have in the time we have left available. But that needs some product. I'm most excited about short-term debt in that space that I think that could create an opportunity. So I think once you get on the fun side, once you get past apes and yachts and what have you in the NFT space, I think there's an enormous potential there to do some really interesting things. And I give an easy example of this. I was lucky enough to go to the very last concert in Rolling Stones European tour recently up in Berlin. We were supposed to go here in Zurich. Switzerland, it didn't work. The guys at the ticket company in Germany sent me a physical ticket, which could have got lost. So that was my first worry. Was it going to get here before Olaf went to Germany? And then I went up there, went to the gig. By the time I got there, all the nice tour t-shirts, especially for Berlin, were sold out. I thought, well, guys, if you thought about it, you could have thought of the ticket as an NFT. You could have communicated with me and said, would you like a t-shirt? $10 extra, we'll send it to your hotel in Berlin. You can get a t-shirt to wear at the gig, which would have been a super thing. And then somebody might see that I'm also going to the Springsteen concert next year. And if I shared some of that data, somebody would say, well, you might want to go and see, I don't know, Fleetwood, whatever. And suddenly, if you use data sensibly and you give me the control over what data I share, I can find some more interesting things to do around that. So I'm excited by some of those possibilities. And that was just a slightly banal example, just to show off a bit. I like to watch that in Berlin, but it was fun, by the way. Almost intimate, just only 20,000 people, which is so small by their standards, but fun on that side, I think.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us today, Olaf. And I certainly look forward to seeing what you do next.
All right. Thanks for having me.